19th century medicine. For our primary source, we chose the journal of Henry Bernard Mathiot. Do you ever wonder what the medical practice was like during the 19th century? How doctors approached fixing serious injuries? How doctors became certified? Or why there were so many deaths during the Civil War? Our presentation attempts to answer these questions. Mathiot uses creative imagery to paint a full picture to show what it was like during the 19th century. Inside his medical journal, he mentioned many different kinds of treatments of medicine. Each source describes the different ways medicine was used and taught. One describes how men and women had to learn on their feet, to become apprentices, to gain experience with doctors. To explain the process of becoming a doctor, we must look at education, the profession, and the practice. It is clear that medicine back then is not the same as it is today. Today, it is very important to keep medical equipment and areas clean, unlike how it was back then. Hygiene and the lack of clean water caused a lot of illness, including deaths. Deaths mostly occurred during the war from untreated wounds. Doctors discovered new techniques, for example, surgery.
Henry Bernard Mathiot was born in Connellsville, Fayette County, Pennsylvania on August 30th, 1815. Parents who were George and Ruth Mathiot. He is a descendant from a French officer. On March 19, 1844, he was married to Rebecca Ruth Mathiot, and they bore 10 children together. He practiced from 1837 to 1889 when he retired. He later died in 1894, living a long and accomplished life.
Education during the 19th century was very different than education today. Today, doctors have to go through 4 years to obtain a bachelor's degree, 4 years to obtain your doctorate, and then complete a residency before obtaining a medical license. In the 19th century, there were not as many strict rules for becoming a doctor. Apprenticeship was the main form of education because it allowed students to gain first-hand experience. People relied more on hands-on experience than sitting in a classroom setting. Medical schools began to become more common starting in the late 19th century to the early 20th century. The average student spent 4 years as an apprentice while they attended lectures at a medical school. Because apprenticeship was the main source of education, there was not a standardized form of medical practice. Henry Bernard Mathiot was limited to general education in his adolescence. He was 22 years old when he studied medicine under Dr. Anderton Brown of Newark, Ohio. Mathiot studied under Brown for 3 years before returning home to practice medicine as an undergraduate in Smithfield, Pennsylvania. 12 years later, he graduated from Jefferson Medical College in 1852, which is shown on this slide. From this point forward, he studied medicine until 1889. Physicians that managed medical schools did so for prestige and money. Most of the knowledge acquired was brought over by Europe. The American medical practice was heavily influenced by European medicine. Many problems arose due to the lack of knowledge. These problems included hygiene and disease, which we will further explore later in this presentation.
The medical profession. Shifting from medical education, we will now discuss the medical profession during the 19th century. In today's society, we have the capability to go on Google or Yelp and search the ratings and comments left by previous patients about the doctor or physician. We are able to see their degree and decide if we trust their expertise in their field. In the 19th century, doctors got their reputation through word of mouth. Phones and computers were not around at the time, so the only way the doctor could establish a reputation was through interactions with the public. They did not have a medical degree from Johns Hopkins University to show off. They just had the prestige held by the public. Mathiot gained his clients through the prestige held by the public of Fayette County, Pennsylvania, where he practiced, which is shown in the slide. An important factor in the medical profession during the 19th century was the Civil War. Although Mathiot's journal did not contain documentation from the Civil War, he still practiced medicine during the time of the Civil War, which lasted from 1861 to 1865. It is still essential that we review this to illustrate a full image of the medical profession during this time. Civil War doctors were not given a choice on whether or not they wanted to enlist. These surgeons were known as contract surgeons. The conditions were less than favorable, resulting in an decrease in overall deaths. Now, turning towards the journal, Henry Bernard Mathiot was assumed to be a doctor that specialized in childbirth. Today, it is known as OBGYN, or obstetrician gynecologist. His journal documents the date, the mother's name, the sex of the child, and any complications that occurred during the procedures, which is pictured on this slide. With this journal, we can understand what the medical practice was like during the 19th century.
The medical practice. Going from the medical profession to the medical practice, we will discuss the experiences a doctor and an apprentice had to overcome. Mathiot used several textbooks and scholarly works to help him understand certain aspects of the medical practice. These works included a treatise of the Materia Medica and Therapeutics, Volume 1, and a System of Anatomy for the Use of Students of Medicine, Volume 2, which is shown in the next slide. He referenced these two works in his journal as shown as he inquired about certain aspects of anatomy and therapeutics. Knowing the basis of medical therapeutics was and still is important to the medical field. The source we used, The 6 Transformations of American Healthcare, described 3 transformations from the 19th century and 3 from the 20th century. It also mentioned Europe's influence and how it helped make American physicians. The 3 major developments during this time were surgery, the cinchona bark, and inoculation and vaccination, each having a different role to play. Surgery was either beneficial or deadly. During the 19th century, doctors and their apprentices did not have the same tools that we have now. The cinchona bark was used to treat patients for malaria. Inoculation and vaccination was used to cure patients who had smallpox. Smallpox was one of the diseases that doctors and apprentices had to worry about. They also worried about diseases or viruses that came with the Civil War. The Civil War resulted in a total of 10 million illnesses with 620,000 deaths. There were 15,000 men in the Civil War that the medical field had to take care of. The soldiers of the war lacked clean water and other nutrients to fight the sicknesses. Some of the sicknesses were not only caused by lack of clean water, but also hygiene. Medical areas where the doctors held the injured or badly wounded soldiers were grossly insufficient. If a soldier's leg was blown off and not treated correctly, the wound would cause infection and later death.
In conclusion, combining the primary source of Henry Bernard Mathiot's journal and a various array of second sources, we are able to understand in depth about medicine during the 19th century. We found sources relating to the medical field as well as the practices. Medicine in America, medicine from the Civil War, American physicians, as well as the 6 transformations of American healthcare. We now understand how doctors operated in respects to education, profession, and practice. In education, doctors spent little time in lectures and gained most of their knowledge and experience through an apprenticeship. Medical schools did not arrive until late into the century, and education will still focus mainly on apprenticeship. In the medical profession, doctors were able to operate solely on the opinion held by the public. Civil War doctors were forced to aid the soldiers and often did so in unfavorable conditions. Mathiot was an obstetrician gynecologist that most likely gained patients through word of mouth through the community. In the medical practice, an accumulation of ideas allowed the profession to grow and improve while some components halted the practice. Ideas were put forth such as surgery, the cinchona bark, and inoculation and vaccination were discovered that improved the practice. The disease was rampant due to both of the lack of hygiene and also the lack of medical knowledge. At this point, you may be asking yourselves, why should I care about Henry Bernard Mathiot's journal? Why does learning this matter? Analyzing primary sources such as Mathiot's journal help historians eliminate the past. To create a clear picture, We use secondary sources to expand and corroborate the ideas put forth by the primary source. By learning this information about the past, we are able to expand the medical practice and improve the methods we use today. By using the documents from the past and the technology of the present, we are now able to cure diseases and epidemics that we did not even know exist during the 19th century, saving millions of lives.